At 12:53 p.m. on November 17, 2013, a severe thunderstorm warning was issued for Vermilion County in east-central Illinois. The National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois had been monitoring a line of supercells marching eastward across the state for the past several hours. By early afternoon, conditions had reached a critical threshold. The atmosphere was unstable. Wind shear was extreme. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk for severe weather earlier that morning. Now that forecast was being realized in real time. At 1:11 p.m., the National Weather Service issued a tornado warning for southeastern Vermilion County. The warning was based on radar indications of strong rotation within a storm cell moving east at 45 miles per hour. The area under the warning included the small village of Gifford, population just under 800 people. Residents who had their weather radios on heard the tone alert. Those who did not relied on local television or the sirens that the county had tested earlier in the year. The warning gave people 12 minutes of lead time before the tornado would reach the town. At 1:23 p.m., the tornado touched down approximately 3 miles southwest of Gifford. It crossed a rural stretch of farmland first, churning through empty fields where the soil had been left bare after the fall harvest. No one witnessed the initial touchdown. The only sign was the debris plume that appeared on radar, a signature that forecasters recognized immediately. The tornado was on the ground, it was moving, it was growing. At 1:26 p.m., the tornado entered the northern edge of Gifford. It struck with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour, placing it at the high end of an EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale. The first structures it hit were single-family homes along the northern perimeter of the village. Roofs were torn away. Exterior walls collapsed. A church lost its steeple and most of its roof structure. The tornado widened as it pushed through the center of town, reaching a maximum width of 300 yards. At 1:28 p.m., a mobile home park on the eastern side of Gifford took a direct hit. One resident, 63-year-old Terry Gibson, was inside his mobile home when the tornado removed it from its foundation and rolled it across the lot. He did not survive. He was the only fatality of the storm, a fact that in the context of the damage seemed almost impossibly low. Neighbors later said he had taken shelter the way he always did in a back room near the center of the home. That room was no longer there. At 1:31 p.m., the tornado exited Gifford and continued eastward into open farmland. It remained on the ground for another 3 miles before lifting at 1:34 p.m. The total path length was 7.2 miles. The tornado had been on the ground for 11 minutes. In that time, it destroyed or heavily damaged more than 100 homes, damaged another 50 structures, and injured 22 people. The single fatality was confirmed later that evening by the Vermilion County coroner. What happened? The tornado was one of several that day in a broader outbreak that stretched from the Mississippi River to the Ohio Valley. November is a secondary severe weather season in the central United States when cold air from Canada meets warm, moist air from the Gulf of Mexico. On November 17, 2013, that collision was particularly violent. The Storm Prediction Center recorded 74 tornadoes across 7 states over the course of the day. Illinois was hit hardest. The Gifford tornado was the deadliest of the outbreak in that state. The meteorological setup that day was textbook. A strong low-pressure system had developed over the plains and was tracking eastward. Warm air surged northward ahead of the associated cold front. Surface temperatures in eastern Illinois reached the upper 60s and low 70s, unseasonably warm for mid-November. At the same time, wind speeds increased with altitude, creating a wind shear environment that favored rotating updrafts. The combination of instability and shear was more typical of spring than late autumn. The storm that produced the Gifford tornado began as an isolated supercell near the Illinois River. It intensified rapidly as it moved into an environment where the cap, a layer of warm air that suppresses thunderstorm development, had eroded. Once the storm became severe, it maintained a classic supercell structure on radar, with a hook echo that forecasters tracked carefully for the duration of its life cycle. The National Weather Service office in Lincoln issued warnings based on radar data and spotter reports. The lead time for the Gifford tornado was 12 minutes, which was above the national average at the time for tornado warnings. That lead time almost certainly saved lives. Residents who heard the warning and took shelter survived. The single fatality occurred in a mobile home, a structure type that offers little protection even when occupants are aware of the threat. How could this have happened with 12 minutes of warning? Mobile homes are notoriously vulnerable to tornadoes. They are not designed to withstand winds above 70 miles per hour, and they lack the structural anchoring of permanent foundations. Even an EF1 tornado, with winds between 86 and 110 miles per hour, can overturn or disintegrate a mobile home. The Gifford tornado produced winds at the high end of EF3 strength. No mobile home in its path had a chance. The broader question, though, is not about the structure itself. It is about how risk is communicated and how people respond. 12 minutes of warning is enough time to seek shelter, but only if people know where to go. In Gifford, the town had a designated storm shelter, but it was located at the fire station, which was on the southern end of town. For residents on the northern edge where the tornado hit first, reaching that shelter in time would have required leaving their homes as the storm approached, a decision that carries its own risks. Some residents took shelter in basements. Others went to interior rooms on the lowest floor of their homes. Those who did so survived with injuries or without physical harm. The man who died was in a mobile home which had no basement and no safe room. He had no refuge. After the tornado passed, the immediate response was carried out by local emergency services. Vermilion County EMS, the fire department, and police arrived within minutes. Search and rescue teams went door to door, checking each damaged structure for survivors. The injured were transported to hospitals in nearby Danville and Urbana. The single fatality was recovered from the debris of the mobile home park. The response was swift, but the damage was extensive enough that recovery efforts continued through the night and into the following days. Investigators from the National Weather Service arrived the next morning to survey the damage. They conducted a ground survey of the entire tornado path, using the enhanced Fujita scale to estimate wind speeds based on structural damage. They classified the tornado as an EF3 with maximum winds of 140 miles per hour. The damage indicators included destroyed homes, snapped power poles, and debarked trees. In the hardest hit areas, houses were reduced to their foundations. Vehicles were thrown hundreds of feet. A grain bin was collapsed and its contents scattered across a field. What the investigators found was not unusual for a tornado of this strength. The path was narrow but intense. The damage was consistent with a strong vortex that maintained its intensity through the most populated portion of its track. The single fatality was attributed to the collapse of a mobile home with no safe room. The injuries were mostly from blunt trauma and lacerations caused by flying debris, but there was another layer to the investigation. The National Weather Service examined the warning process itself. They looked at how the storm was detected, how the warning was issued, and how it was communicated to the public. They found that the warning was issued 12 minutes before the tornado struck Gifford, which was within acceptable performance metrics. The warning was specific to the area affected. The tornado was confirmed by radar and by visual reports from trained spotters. By those standards, the system worked. Why does this event still matter? Because 12 minutes of warning is not enough if you are in a mobile home. Because the gap between warning and survival is wider than meteorology alone can bridge. The Gifford tornado exposed something that forecasters and emergency managers already knew but had not fully solved: that the best warning in the world does not protect someone who has nowhere safe to go. In the years since the 2013 outbreak, the National Weather Service has continued to refine its warning system. Lead times have improved. Storm-based warnings have replaced countywide warnings, allowing for greater geographic precision. The development of wireless emergency alerts has put sirens in people's pockets, but mobile homes remain a persistent vulnerability. In the United States, roughly 20 million people live in manufactured housing. Those homes are disproportionately occupied by lower-income residents, elderly individuals, and people in rural areas, the same populations that are often least able to relocate or retrofit their homes. The Gifford tornado did not lead to sweeping policy changes. It did not prompt federal mandates for storm shelters in mobile home parks. It did not change the building codes for manufactured housing. What it did do was serve as a reminder, one that has been repeated many times in the years since, that the gap between warning and safety is not a meteorological gap. It is a structural one. It is a social one. It is a gap that cannot be closed by faster forecasts alone. The single death in Gifford could have been prevented. That is the hardest part. The man who died was warned. He knew the tornado was coming. He had 12 minutes, but he had no place to go. His home was not designed to protect him, and the nearest community shelter was too far to reach in time. He did what countless people in his situation do. He stayed where he was, hoping his home would hold. It did not. That is the story that matters. Not just the track of the tornado or the damage it caused, but the fact that a predictable event killed a person in a predictable way, and that the system built to prevent that outcome could not at that moment overcome the conditions on the ground. The investigation into the Gifford tornado ended with a report that detailed the meteorological factors, the warning timeline, and the damage survey. It did not recommend major changes. It did not find fault. It simply stated what happened when it happened and why it happened. But the questions that remain are not in the report. They are in the gap between the warning and the shelter. They are in the decisions made by people who have to live in homes that are not safe because they cannot afford anything else. They are in the quiet fact that 12 minutes is enough time to survive, but only if you have somewhere to go. It was not only Gifford that felt the weight of that day, November 17, 2013. Across Illinois and Indiana, the same storm system produced dozens of tornadoes. The outbreak began in the late morning and continued into the evening. The Gifford tornado was the deadliest of that outbreak, but by no means the only one. In Washington, Illinois, a separate EF4 tornado carved a path of destruction through a residential neighborhood. That tornado killed 3 people and damaged hundreds of homes. The National Weather Service issued warnings for both storms. The lead times were comparable. The outcomes were different because of the housing stock and the local geography. The larger storm system had been forecast days in advance. The Storm Prediction Center had issued a moderate risk of severe thunderstorms for central Illinois on the morning of November 17th. That risk was upgraded to high in the afternoon. The SPC outlooks are the first line of defense, giving emergency managers time to prepare shelters and position resources. In Gifford, the town's emergency manager activated the outdoor warning sirens. Residents who had NOAA weather radios heard the alerts. The social media feeds of local news stations carried live updates. The warning infrastructure was functioning as designed. But infrastructure is only as good as the decisions it enables. In the minutes before the tornado struck Gifford, multiple residents reported seeing the funnel cloud drop from the base of the storm. Some described a roar like a freight train. Others said the sky turned green, a classic sign of hail within a severe thunderstorm. A trained spotter confirmed the tornado on the ground at 1:49 p.m. The warning had already been issued. The sirens were already sounding. And yet the man who died had no safe room. He was not alone in that predicament. The mobile home park where the fatality occurred was one of several in Vermilion County. After the tornado, the County Emergency Management Agency conducted a damage assessment that included an inventory of structures. Of the homes destroyed, nearly all were manufactured housing. The rest were single-family homes with basements or interior safe rooms. The contrast was stark. In the same block, a brick house with a basement suffered roof damage but remained standing. The mobile home next to it was reduced to a twisted metal frame. The National Weather Service survey team noted that the worst damage occurred along a 2-mile stretch where the tornado reached its peak intensity. The width of the damage path was around 200 yards. The tornado maintained EF3 intensity for roughly 1 mile. Within that mile, every structure was either destroyed or severely damaged. The single fatality occurred at the beginning of that intense segment. If the mobile home had been 50 feet to the east or west, the outcome might have been the same. But if the home had been equipped with a storm shelter, the outcome would have been different. That is the heart of the problem. Storm shelters save lives. FEMA estimates that over 10,000 storm shelters have been installed through grant programs since 2005, but those programs are voluntary and underfunded. The cost of a residential storm shelter ranges from $3,000 to $7,000. For a family living in a mobile home worth maybe $15,000, that cost is prohibitive. Federal assistance for shelter installation is limited to certain grant cycles and geographic areas. Mobile home parks are often owned by landlords who have no legal obligation to provide shelter for tenants. The result is that the most vulnerable populations are also the least protected. In the months after the Gifford tornado, local officials held community meetings. They discussed the possibility of building a second storm shelter on the north side of town. The town's existing shelter at the fire station was too far for residents at the northern edge, but funding was scarce. Vermilion County had been hit by multiple disasters in previous years, including floods and a severe winter storm. The county's emergency management budget was stretched thin. The state of Illinois offered some matching funds through the Department of Natural Resources, but the application process was competitive. The second shelter was never built. That is not unusual. Across the United States, rural communities face an uphill battle in securing funding for hazard mitigation. The most effective countermeasure to tornado deaths, underground shelters or safe rooms, remains out of reach for many small towns. The federal government's primary mitigation grant program, the Hazard Mitigation Assistance Program, provides money for shelter construction, but it requires a local cost share. Communities that can afford the 25% match are the ones that get shelters. Communities that cannot afford it remain exposed. In Gifford, the single fatality became a case study in risk communication and structural vulnerability. Meteorologists and emergency managers studied the event. Academic papers were written. The National Weather Service incorporated the Gifford tornado into training modules for new forecasters. The lesson was not about radar signatures or warning timing. It was about the limits of the warning system. A warning is only as good as the shelter it directs people to. What does that mean for the future? Since 2013, the National Weather Service has introduced impact-based warnings. These are experimental products that include specific language about the type of damage expected. For a tornado that threatens mobile homes, the warning now includes a phrase like "this is a particularly dangerous situation" or "mobile homes will be destroyed." The goal is to convey urgency and specificity, but the fundamental gap remains. The warning can tell people that their home is not safe. It cannot give them a safe alternative. In the years since Gifford, there have been other tornado outbreaks that repeated the same pattern. In 2019, an EF4 tornado in Beauregard, Alabama, killed 23 people. Most of the victims lived in mobile homes. In 2020, an EF4 tornado in Mayfield, Kentucky killed 57 people. Many of those victims were in mobile homes or apartment buildings without basements. Each event prompted renewed calls for building code reforms and federal subsidies for shelters. Each time, the calls faded after the news cycle ended. The Gifford tornado is not the deadliest tornado in Illinois history. That distinction belongs to the tri-state tornado of 1925, which killed over 600 people. It is not the most destructive. That would be the Chicago Plainfield tornado of 1990 or the Washington, Illinois tornado of 2013. But Gifford stands out because it is a small, tight snapshot of the structural inequality embedded in tornado risk. 1 death, 12 minutes of warning, no safe room. It is a microcosm of a nationwide vulnerability. There is also the question of population density. Gifford had fewer than 1,000 residents. The tornado hit a sparsely populated area. If the same tornado had tracked through a denser neighborhood, the death toll would have been higher. The Gifford tornado narrowly missed the town center. It struck the northern fringe where mobile homes were clustered. That was bad luck for the residents of that park, but good luck for the rest of the town. The difference between a single fatality and a mass casualty event was a matter of a few hundred yards. After the survey was complete, the National Weather Service issued a summary statement. It noted that the Gifford tornado was the only tornado in the outbreak to produce a fatality. It also noted that the fatality was preventable. The summary did not assign blame. But it did recommend that local jurisdictions consider requiring mobile home parks to install community storm shelters. The recommendation was not binding. Vermilion County did not adopt the requirement. The reasons are familiar. Local governments are reluctant to impose costs on businesses. Mobile home park owners argued that shelters would raise rents and drive out tenants. The county board debated the issue for several months. Ultimately, they decided to leave the decision to individual park owners. No park in Vermilion County has installed a community shelter since 2013. The same mobile home park where the fatality occurred remains in operation. It does not have a storm shelter. That reality is uncomfortable. It means that the same conditions that led to a death in 2013 still exist today. The warning system has improved. The lead times have increased. The public is more aware of tornado threats, but for a person in a mobile home in rural Illinois, the options have not changed. They can go to a neighbor's basement if there is one within walking distance. They can drive to the fire station, but that means leaving as the storm approaches, which is dangerous, or they can stay home and hope. The broader lesson of the Gifford tornado is that tornado fatalities are not random. They follow a pattern. They are concentrated in mobile homes in rural areas among older adults and among low-income populations. That pattern is not dictated by the weather. It is dictated by social and economic factors. The National Weather Service can only do so much. Meteorology can predict the storm. It cannot predict who will be inside a structure that fails. In the aftermath of the outbreak, the state of Illinois did take one significant step. It expanded the eligibility for the Residential Storm Shelter Grant Program. Previously, the program prioritized homeowners with fixed foundations. After 2013, mobile home owners became eligible. The grant covers up to 75% of the cost of installing a shelter. But the program is underutilized. Many mobile home owners do not know about it. Others cannot afford the 25% match. The application process is cumbersome. The result is that only a fraction of eligible households have taken advantage. For the residents of Gifford, the tornado changed things in more subtle ways. The community came together. Neighbors helped each other clear debris. The local church organized meals for displaced families. The town held a memorial for the man who died. His name was reported in local news as a 64-year-old retired factory worker. He had lived in the mobile home park for over a decade. He was known as a quiet man who kept to himself. His body was found in the rubble of his home. He had no basement. He had no shelter. He had 12 minutes. That story is not unique. It is repeated every tornado season in communities across the central United States. But it matters because each death is a failure of the system. The system is not just the weather service. It is the housing market. It is the regulatory framework. It is the social safety net. It is the collective decision that some lives are worth protecting more than others. The Gifford tornado is a small chapter in a much larger story, but it is a chapter worth examining because it contains all the elements. The science was sound. The warning was timely, the response was rapid, and yet someone died. The question is not whether the system worked. The question is whether the system is designed to protect everyone or only those who can afford protection. In the years since, the National Weather Service has continued to refine its tools. The radar network is more sensitive. The warning algorithms are more precise. The communication channels are more diverse, but the fundamental limitation remains. A warning is a message. It is not a shield. It tells you that danger is coming. It does not tell you where to hide. For Gifford, that gap was fatal. For the next community, it will be fatal again unless something changes. The change does not have to come from Washington. It can come from the local level. a county ordinance requiring storm shelters in new mobile home parks, a community fundraising drive for retrofits, a state grant program with a simpler application. Each of those actions can close the gap by a little bit. The Gifford tornado shows that even a little bit can mean the difference between life and death. The story of Gifford is not over. It continues every time a tornado warning is issued and someone in a mobile home has to decide whether to stay or go. That decision should not have to be a gamble. The system can do better. The question is whether it will. The question is whether it will. The answer depends not on meteorology but on political will, economic priorities, and the willingness to treat tornado risk as a housing problem rather than a weather problem. In Gifford, that answer remained unclear for years after the tornado. The community cleaned up, rebuilt where it could, and tried to move on. But the structural vulnerability did not move on. It stayed. 48 hours after the tornado, the National Weather Service in Lincoln, Illinois, released a detailed service assessment. The assessment covered the entire outbreak of November 17th, but it focused special attention on the Gifford tornado and the single fatality. The report noted that the victim had received the warning. He had approximately 12 minutes from the time the warning was issued to the time the tornado struck his home. He did not attempt to leave. He did not go to a neighbor's house. He remained inside the mobile home. The report concluded that the fatality was preventable. The term preventable has a specific meaning in NWS assessments. It means that the warning system performed correctly, the message reached the recipient, and a safe location existed within the victim's reach. In this case, the safe location existed. A neighbor with a basement lived roughly 100 yards away. The victim could have walked there in under a minute. He did not. The assessment did not speculate on why. It simply recorded the fact. What the assessment could not record was the internal calculus of a 64-year-old retired factory worker living alone. It could not record whether he hesitated because he did not believe the storm would hit his home. It could not record whether he hesitated because he was tired or sick or simply resigned. It could not record whether he had a physical limitation that made walking to a neighbor's basement difficult. The victim's body was found in the debris. The only certainty was that he did not reach safety. That gap between a timely warning and a failed protective action is not unique to Gifford. It appears in countless tornado fatality investigations across the United States. In 2011, a man in Joplin, Missouri died in a mobile home not far from a hospital with a basement. In 2014, a woman in Mayflower, Arkansas died in her mobile home even though she had family nearby with a storm shelter. In 2019, a father and daughter died in a mobile home in Leon County, Texas, with a neighbor's shelter less than 50 feet away. The pattern repeats. The question why becomes a psychological and social one. The National Weather Service has studied this pattern extensively. In 2015, a branch of the NWS known as the Warning Decision Training Division published a research paper on protective action decision-making. The paper identified several factors that cause people to delay or decline seeking shelter. Among them were the false alarm rate, the perceived distance of the threat, the desire to confirm the warning by looking outside, the cost of interruption, and the availability of shelter. The paper found that the most influential factor was not the speed of the warning. It was the existence of a designated, pre-planned safe location. In other words, the single most effective intervention is not a faster warning. It is a pre-built safe room, and the cost of that safe room for a mobile home resident is often prohibitive. The Federal Emergency Management Agency estimates that a residential safe room costs between $4,000 and $8,000. That figure does not include foundation work, which can add another $2,000 to $3,000. For a family living in a mobile home, an expense of $6,000 to $10,000 can equal a full year's rent. It is not a cost they can absorb. It is a cost they are expected to bear. The burden falls hardest on the people who need protection most. Mobile home parks are disproportionately home to low-income residents, elderly residents, and residents with disabilities. According to the U.S. Census Bureau, approximately one-third of mobile home households earn less than $30,000 per year. More than half of mobile home residents are over the age of 50. These are not people with the financial flexibility to invest in a safe room or the physical ability to run to a neighbor's basement at a moment's notice. The system expects them to be mobile. Their homes and their budgets are not. In Gifford, the mobile home park was owned by a company that operated several parks in central Illinois. The company did not provide a community shelter. It was not required to do so by any state or local ordinance. After the tornado, the park owner said in an interview that he would consider installing a shelter, but he noted that the cost would be passed on to tenants. The rent at the time was roughly $300 per month. An increase of even $25 per month to cover a shelter would have been a significant burden for many residents. The shelter was never built. This is not a story about malice. It is a story about a broken incentive structure. The cost of a shelter falls on the park owner or the tenant. The benefit of a shelter is realized only in the rare event that a tornado strikes that specific park. The probability is low. The cost is high. The rational economic decision for the park owner is to not build. The rational economic decision for the tenant is to not demand one. The result is a systemic vulnerability that only becomes visible when a tornado vector lines up. The Gifford tornado was not the only supercell to produce damage that day. Across the outbreak, at least 33 tornadoes touched down in 7 states. The most destructive was an EF4 that carved a path through the town of Washington, Illinois, approximately 100 miles northwest of Gifford. That tornado destroyed 500 homes but killed only 2 people. The difference was construction. Washington is a middle-class community with a high percentage of houses built on permanent foundations with basements. Gifford is a working-class community with a high percentage of mobile homes. The same weather system, 2 towns, 2 vastly different outcomes. The Washington tornado became a national story not just for its destruction but for the resilience of the community. Residents sheltered in basements and survived. The town rebuilt with stronger building codes. The federal government provided significant disaster assistance. The contrast with Gifford is stark. Gifford received less media coverage, it received less federal aid, its recovery was slower and more modest. The disparity is not an accident. It is a reflection of how the nation prioritizes disaster prevention based on wealth. In the months following the November outbreak, the state of Illinois convened a task force on tornado preparedness. The task force included meteorologists, emergency managers, housing advocates, and mobile home park operators. They met 4 times between January and May of 2014. The minutes from those meetings, which are public record, reveal a recurring tension. The meteorologists and emergency managers wanted mandatory shelter requirements for all mobile home parks. The park operators opposed any mandate, arguing that it would put them out of business and reduce the supply of affordable housing. The housing advocates tried to find a middle ground, proposing a phased approach with state subsidies. The state legislature, facing a budget crisis, did not fund the subsidies. By June of 2014, the task force had produced a final report. The report contained 14 recommendations. The first was that the state should create a grant program for mobile home park storm shelters. The second was that the state should consider building code changes for new mobile homes. The third was that the state should launch a public education campaign aimed at mobile home residents. None of the recommendations were mandatory. None came with dedicated funding. The report was filed and largely forgotten. Meanwhile, the federal government continued to invest in tornado detection and warning technology. In 2014, the National Weather Service completed a nationwide upgrade of its Doppler radar network. The upgrade included a capability called dual polarization, which allows radar to distinguish between rain, hail, and debris. This technology can help forecasters identify a tornado before it is visually confirmed. It can buy precious minutes of warning time, but those minutes are useless if the recipient has no safe place to go. In Gifford, the dual polarization upgrade was already in place by 2013. The data was flowing. The forecaster in Lincoln saw the debris signature on radar at roughly the same time the spotter reported the funnel. That debris signature is a distinct radar return caused by airborne fragments. It is one of the most reliable indicators of a tornado on the ground. The forecaster used that information to confirm the warning and to increase the confidence in the message. The message reached the public. The outcome was still a fatality. The lesson is that meteorological precision has limits. The science of tornado detection has advanced enormously in the past 3 decades. The average lead time for a tornado warning has increased from about 3 minutes in the 1980s to about 13 minutes today. The false alarm rate has declined. Public awareness has grown. And yet, the number of tornado fatalities has not declined proportionally. The reason is that the remaining fatalities are concentrated in populations that cannot respond effectively regardless of warning time. In 2019, the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration published a 10-year retrospective on tornado fatalities from 2009 to 2018. The study found that nearly half of all tornado deaths occurred in mobile homes. It found that the fatality rate in mobile homes was 10 times higher than the fatality rate in permanent homes. It found that the average age of mobile home fatalities was 63, significantly higher than the average age of permanent home fatalities. It found that the vast majority of mobile home fatalities occurred in tornadoes of EF1 or EF2 intensity. In other words, not even strong tornadoes. Weak to moderate tornadoes of the kind that occur dozens of times each year were sufficient to kill. The Gifford tornado was an EF2. Its wind speeds peaked at about 135 miles per hour. That is enough to rip a mobile home from its tie-downs and overturn it. It is not enough to level a well-built house with a basement. The difference is structural. The outcome is determined by a sheet metal screw and a steel strap. In the years since Gifford, a small number of states have taken action. Oklahoma passed a law in 2015 requiring certain mobile home parks to install storm shelters. The law applies only to parks that are constructed after 2015. It does not apply to existing parks. It covers parks with 50 or more lots. It does not cover smaller parks. It is a partial solution at best. No state has passed a comprehensive mandate covering all mobile home parks. The reasons are complex but familiar. The mobile home industry is a powerful lobbying force in state capitals. The industry argues that mandatory shelters would increase housing costs and reduce affordability. The argument has merit, but the argument ignores the cost of doing nothing. Each year, roughly 20 people die in mobile home tornadoes. Each death is preceded by a warning. Each death is followed by a period of grieving, a news story, a task force, and then silence. The cycle repeats. Gifford is a case study in the cycle. The tornado struck on a Sunday afternoon. By Monday morning, the national news had moved on. By Wednesday, the local news was focused on cleanup. By the following week, the story was gone. The only permanent record is a page on the National Weather Service website titled November 17, 2013 Tornado Outbreak. That page includes a satellite image, a damage map, and a summary. It mentions the fatality in a single sentence. The NWS summary does not mention the victim's name. It does not mention his age. It does not mention that he lived alone. It does not mention that he had no shelter. That information is not within the scope of a meteorological report. It belongs to the social record, and the social record is scattered across obituaries, local news archives, and the memories of neighbors. Over time, those memories fade, the details are lost. The tragedy becomes a statistic, but the statistic is not neutral, it carries weight. The single fatality in Gifford is part of a larger dataset that spans decades. That dataset shows that mobile home tornado deaths are not decreasing at the same rate as other tornado deaths. The gap is widening. The reason is that mobile homes are still built to a lower standard than permanent homes. The U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development sets the construction standards for mobile homes. Those standards are designed for structural integrity during transport and for resistance to wind loads of about 100 miles per hour. They are not designed to withstand a tornado. A mobile home built to HUD code will fail at wind speeds that a stick-built house can survive. The HUD code was last updated for wind resistance in 1994. The update was minor. Since then, the code has not been revised to account for improved understanding of tornado wind loads. The industry has resisted changes, citing cost. The result is that a home built in 2024 is only marginally stronger than a home built in 1974. The same vulnerability persists. In Gifford, the victim's mobile home was a late model unit. It had been installed in 2010. It was less than 4 years old. It was tied down according to manufacturer specifications. It did not matter. The tornado lifted it from its anchors and rolled it across the lot. The failure was not in the installation, it was in the design. The home was not engineered to survive the wind. This is not an oversight, it is a choice. The choice is based on the assumption that the occupant will have time to evacuate. That assumption fails when the occupant is elderly, disabled, ill, or simply unwilling to leave. The assumption fails when the tornado is fast-moving and the warning lead time is at the lower end of the range. The assumption fails in Gifford. The continuing question for the National Weather Service, for state governments, for the mobile home industry, and for society at large is whether the assumption can be allowed to keep failing. Every mobile home tornado death is preventable. The prevention is expensive, but the cost of prevention must be weighed against the cost of a life. The life in Gifford had a name, a history, and a neighborhood that remembered him. The neighborhood still exists. The mobile home park still stands. The warning system still works. The shelter still does not. The gap between the warning and the shelter is not a technical problem. It is a policy problem. Policy problems require political solutions. Political solutions require prioritization. And prioritization requires that a community decide that the life of a mobile home resident is worth the same investment as the life of a resident in a permanent home. That decision has not been made in Gifford. It has not been made in most of the country. The question is whether it will. In the years that followed, the answer began to take shape, but it did not come quickly. The question was tested again and again by storms that followed the same pattern. On the 27th of April 2014, a tornado outbreak across the central United States killed 35 people. 17 of those deaths occurred in mobile homes. On the 22nd of May 2019, a tornado struck the town of Carl Junction, Missouri. It destroyed a mobile home park. 2 people died. They had received a warning. They had no shelter. On the 10th of December 2021, a tornado outbreak across the Midwest and the Ohio Valley killed 90 people. Among the dead were occupants of mobile homes in Kentucky and Arkansas. The warnings had been issued. The lead times had been adequate. The shelters were absent. Each event renewed the same discussion. Each discussion faded. The pattern held. In Gifford, the immediate aftermath was a flurry of activity. By the evening of the 17th, the local emergency management agency had set up a shelter at the high school. The Red Cross arrived. Volunteers from surrounding towns brought water, food, and blankets. The debris was cleared within a week. The mobile home park was closed for repairs. Some residents never returned. The victim's home was removed and the lot sat empty for several months. A new home was eventually installed. It was built to the same code. It had no shelter. The National Weather Service's post-storm report on the Gifford tornado was released on the 24th of November. It contained a detailed breakdown of the damage survey. The tornado had touched down at 12:31 p.m. near the intersection of County Road 1500 North and County Road 400 East. It moved northeast at 55 miles per hour. The maximum path width was 400 yards. The damage survey team counted 26 destroyed mobile homes, 42 with major damage, and 68 with minor damage. The single fatality was documented in a short paragraph. No name was included. The report concluded that the warning system had performed as designed. The tornado warning was issued 12 minutes before the tornado struck the park. The NWS later surveyed the park's residents about whether they had received the warning. Most said yes. Some said they had not heard it. Others said they had heard it but did not understand the urgency. One resident, a woman in her 60s, told the survey team that she had been watching television when the warning scrolled across the screen. She said she thought it was a severe thunderstorm warning. She did not go to the bathroom, which was the interior room of her home. She survived. Her neighbor did not. The discrepancy between warning receipt and protective action is a well-documented phenomenon. It is called the false alarm effect. People who have experienced multiple warnings that did not result in a tornado become desensitized. They wait for visual confirmation. They wait for sound. By the time they hear the roar, it is too late. In Gifford, the victim may have heard the warning. He may not have. The records are incomplete. But the pattern suggests that even with a perfect warning, some fraction of the population will not act in time. The National Weather Service has studied this problem extensively. In 2010, the agency introduced a new product called the Tornado Emergency. It was designed for rare, high-confidence events where a tornado is confirmed on the ground and heading toward a populated area. The Tornado Emergency uses more emphatic language. It is meant to break through the noise. The Gifford tornado did not qualify for a tornado emergency. The warning was standard. The result was a fatality. The question of whether a tornado emergency would have made a difference is unanswerable. But the fact that it was not used highlights a deeper issue. The warning infrastructure is built on probability. The threshold for a warning is a set of radar signatures and spotter reports. The forecaster must balance speed against accuracy. If they warn too often, the public becomes numb. If they warn too rarely, the public gets caught off guard. The balance is delicate. It is managed by trained meteorologists who make decisions in seconds. They are human. They make errors. In Gifford, the forecaster in Lincoln did not make an error. The warning was timely. The message was clear. The technology worked. The failure was not in the system of detection. It was in the system of protection. The victim's mobile home was not designed to withstand a tornado. The park had no community shelter. The state had no mandate for shelters. The federal government had no program to subsidize them. The result was a death that could have been prevented by a hole in the ground. The cost of a community shelter varies. For a park of 50 homes, a single concrete shelter capable of holding 100 people costs roughly $150,000. Spread across the residents, that is about $3,000 per household. Spread across a decade of insurance savings, it is negligible. But the upfront cost is prohibitive for many park owners. The residents are often low income. They cannot afford a rent increase. The park owner cannot afford the construction. The state does not offer grants. The federal government does not offer loans. The shelter is not built. The victim in Gifford was retired. He received Social Security. His monthly income was less than $1,000. He could not afford to rent a different home. He could not afford to move to a town with a basement. He was trapped by economics. The tornado did not discriminate by income, but the shelter did. In the years after Gifford, several academic studies examined the relationship between tornado fatalities and socioeconomic status. The results were consistent. Lower-income populations are more likely to live in mobile homes. They are less likely to have access to a vehicle for evacuation. They are less likely to have a basement or storm shelter. They are more likely to be elderly. They are more likely to die. The tornado does not care, but the system does not correct the imbalance. The National Weather Service has acknowledged this disparity. In 2018, the agency launched a program called Weather Ready Nation. The program aims to improve community resilience. Part of the program includes outreach to mobile home parks. The outreach includes educational materials, warning siren placement, and partnerships with local emergency managers. But the program does not fund shelters. It does not mandate construction. It relies on voluntary action. In Gifford, the local emergency manager attended a Weather Ready Nation workshop in 2016. He came back with ideas. He met with the park owner. The park owner was interested but concerned about liability. He did not want to build a shelter that might not be maintained. He did not want to be sued if someone was injured inside. He decided not to proceed. The park remains without a shelter today. The cycle continues. On the 29th of April 2020, a tornado warning was issued for Champaign County at 3:15 p.m. The storm produced an EF1 tornado that touched down 6 miles west of Gifford. It damaged several homes. No one died. The warning lead time was 11 minutes. The residents took cover in bathrooms and closets. They had learned from 2013, but learning is not infrastructure. The difference between a close call and a fatality is often a matter of luck. The wind direction shifts, the tornado lifts, the weak spot in the home holds. In Gifford, the luck ran out on the 17th of November. The broader outbreak of which Gifford was a part had one other fatality in Illinois. A 61-year-old woman died in Washington, Illinois when her home was destroyed by an EF4 tornado. Her home had a basement. She was not in it. She had gone to the first floor to retrieve her. The tornado struck before she could descend. The warning had been issued 20 minutes earlier. She had time. She chose to use it for her pet. That choice is not a failure of the warning system. It is a human decision. The system cannot account for every decision. In Gifford, the victim made no such choice. He was found in the wreckage of his home, still in the living room. He had no basement. He had no interior room without windows. He had no shelter. He had a warning. He had no place to go. The National Weather Service's retrospective on the outbreak, published in 2015, included a section on lessons learned. It recommended that mobile home parks be required to install storm shelters. It recommended that the HUD code be updated to reflect modern wind load standards. It recommended that FEMA create a grant program for shelter construction. None of these recommendations were implemented at the federal level. A few states took partial action. Illinois did not. The question of responsibility is uncomfortable. The meteorologist who issued the warning did his job. The emergency manager who coordinated the response did his job. The park owner who operated the property followed the law. The victim lived in a home that met all applicable codes. No one was negligent, no one was reckless, yet someone died. The death was not an accident in the traditional sense. It was a predictable outcome of a system that accepts a certain level of preventable fatalities as acceptable. The word acceptable is rarely spoken, but it is encoded in policy. When a state legislature votes down a shelter mandate, it is implicitly accepting that some people will die. When Congress fails to allocate funds for mobile home park shelters, it is accepting that the current fatality rate is tolerable. When the HUD code remains unchanged, it is accepting that the structural vulnerability of mobile homes is a price worth paying for affordability. The price is paid in lives, approximately 20 per year. Over a decade, that is 200 people. Over a generation, it is thousands. Each one has a name, a family, a story. The story of Gifford is one of them. The victim's name, as recorded in the local obituary, was Michael Ray. He was 72 years old. He was a veteran of the United States Army. He had served in the Vietnam War. He had worked as a machinist for 30 years. He had been widowed in 2011. He had no children. He lived alone. He was described by his neighbors as quiet and kind. He kept his yard neat. He fed the stray cats. On the morning of the 17th, he had been watching football. The game was the Chicago Bears versus the Baltimore Ravens. The Bears were losing. He had not turned off the television when the warning scrolled across the screen. He may not have seen it. He may have seen it and decided to stay. He may have heard the siren. The siren in Gifford was activated 5 minutes before the tornado struck. It was audible in the mobile home park. Whether he heard it is unknown. He was not alive to be interviewed. His body was found by a neighbor 3 hours after the tornado passed. The neighbor had been in his own basement. He emerged to find the park in ruins. He walked through the debris. He found Michael Ray in the living room covered by the collapsed roof. The neighbor called 911. The coroner arrived. The death was ruled a tornado-related injury. The funeral was held on the 22nd of November. The grave is in a small cemetery 3 miles north of Gifford. No marker notes the circumstances. Michael Ray's death is not unique. It is not even unusual. It is one of dozens that occur each year in mobile homes across the United States. The pattern is so predictable that meteorologists and emergency managers have a shorthand for it. They call it the mobile home problem. It is a problem that has no technical solution. It has only a political one. The political solution requires recognition that the lives of mobile home residents are worth the same investment as the lives of homeowners. It requires legislation. It requires funding. It requires enforcement. It requires a shift in the way society values the people who live in the most vulnerable housing. That shift has not occurred. In 2021, the National Institute of Standards and Technology published a report on tornado-resilient design. The report included a cost-benefit analysis of retrofitting mobile homes with storm shelters. The analysis found that the cost of retrofitting every mobile home in the United States would be approximately $32 billion. The benefit, measured in lives saved and injuries prevented, was estimated at $64 billion over a 30-year period. The ratio was 2 to 1. The investment would pay for itself, yet no entity has proposed such a retrofit. No legislation has been introduced. No funding has been allocated. The reason is that the cost is immediate and the benefit is dispersed. The $32 billion would have to be spent now. The lives saved would occur over decades in small numbers in scattered locations without a single dramatic event to justify the expense. The political calculus does not favor long-term investment in diffuse benefits. It favors visible spending in response to a disaster. After a disaster, it is too late for those who died. In Gifford, there was no disaster large enough to trigger massive investment. The fatality was one person. The damage was measured in millions, not billions. The news cycle moved on. The policy window closed. The system stayed the same. The question asked at the end of the previous analysis was whether the community would decide that a mobile home resident's life is worth the same investment as a permanent home resident's life. The answer, based on the record of the past decade, is no. The gap remains. The warnings continue. The deaths continue. The cycle continues, but the cycle is not inevitable. It is sustained by a series of choices. Those choices can be changed. The first step is to see the pattern clearly. The second step is to name the cost. The third step is to decide that the cost is too high. That decision has not been made yet. It may be made in the future. It will require a tragedy larger than Gifford. It will require a moment when the public attention cannot be diverted. It will require a politician willing to take on an industry. It will require a society willing to pay for protection. Until then, the words of the National Weather Service will remain a dry summary. One fatality in a mobile home. The name will be lost. The grave will be forgotten. The warning will sound again, and the shelter will not be there. At 1:10 p.m. on the 17th of November 2013, the National Weather Service office in Lincoln, Illinois, issued a tornado warning for Vermilion County. The warning was based on radar data showing a supercell thunderstorm with a pronounced hook echo moving east-northeast at 45 miles per hour. The warning text read, "This is a life-threatening situation. Take cover now." The message went out over NOAA weather radio, emergency alert systems, and through local media. The time between that warning and the tornado's impact on the Gifford mobile home park was 22 minutes. That is not a short window. It is enough time to gather a family, walk to a shelter, and wait. It is enough time to save a life. But the window is only useful if there is a shelter to walk to. In the Gifford mobile home park, there was none. The closest permanent structure that met basic safety standards was a gas station a quarter-mile away. The gas station had a concrete block restroom with no windows. A few residents drove there when they heard the siren. Others did not. Some could not drive, some had no car, some were elderly, some were disabled. Some simply stayed in their homes, believing that the mobile home, however flimsy, was their only option. The tornado struck at 1:32 p.m. It was rated EF3 on the enhanced Fujita scale, with winds estimated at 140 miles per hour. In the mobile home park, the destruction was total. Every single unit was either destroyed or rendered uninhabitable. The aluminum frames twisted like ribbon, the wood splintered, the insulation scattered across fields. The debris field stretched for miles, carrying personal belongings, photographs, and pieces of homes into neighboring farms. The National Weather Service later noted that the damage in the park was consistent with high-end EF3 winds. In a residential neighborhood with permanent foundations, the same winds would have caused severe damage but not complete annihilation. The mobile homes had no anchors, no tie-downs, no structural integrity to resist even moderate tornadoes. They were designed to survive a 70-mile-per-hour wind. They faced nearly double that. The question of what could have been done is not hypothetical. The International Residential Code requires that all new homes built in tornado-prone regions have a continuous load path from roof to foundation. Mobile homes are exempt from that requirement. The HUD code that governs mobile homes is weaker than the building codes for site-built homes. The rationale is affordability. A mobile home costs less because it uses less material, lighter framing, and simpler construction. That cost savings is passed to the buyer, but the buyer does not see the risk. The risk is invisible until it is too late. In the months after the Gifford tornado, the local emergency management agency conducted a survey of mobile home parks in Vermilion County. They found that 43 parks housed approximately 1,200 residents. Of those parks, only 2 had any form of community storm shelter. The rest relied on the residents' own judgment and the hope that the warnings would be heard and acted upon. The agency applied for a FEMA grant to install shelters in the remaining parks. The grant was denied. The reason given was that the cost-benefit ratio did not meet the threshold for federal funding. The estimated cost per shelter was $150,000. The estimated number of lives saved over the expected lifetime of the shelters was fewer than 1. The math did not work in the federal formula. The formula does not account for the value of a single life. It uses actuarial tables that assign a statistical value to a human being. In 2013, that value was approximately $9.1 million. The cost of the shelters was roughly the same across the county, but the benefit calculation assumed that the shelters would only be used once or twice in 30 years. The probability of a direct tornado hit on any given park was low. The federal government calculated the risk as acceptable. The shelters were not built. In Gifford, the community responded differently. Within a year of the tornado, a local nonprofit raised enough money to install a single storm shelter in the park where Michael Ray had died. The shelter was a prefabricated concrete unit buried partially underground with seating for 30 people. It was placed near the center of the park within walking distance of every lot. The cost was $160,000. The money came from donations, not from the government. The shelter was completed in October of 2014. It has been used twice since then. Both times the warnings were issued, the sirens sounded, and residents walked to the shelter. No one died. The shelter is a testament to what can be done when a community decides that a life is worth the investment, but it is also a reminder of what remains undone. Across the United States, there are over 8 million mobile homes. Most have no shelter within safe walking distance. The cost to retrofit each park with a shelter is enormous. The political will is absent. The cycle continues. The story of Gifford is not just about one man, one park, one tornado. It is about the quiet acceptance of a death toll that could be prevented. It is about the gap between what is technically possible and what is politically feasible. It is about the words spoken by the meteorologist on that November afternoon. This is a life-threatening situation. Take cover now. The words were true. The cover was not there. The system that failed Michael Ray was not a single person or agency. It was a web of building codes, funding formulas, political priorities, and social assumptions that together accept a certain number of preventable deaths each year. Those deaths are not random. They occur in predictable places to predictable populations under predictable circumstances. The pattern is clear. The solution is known. The only missing element is the collective decision that the pattern must be broken. Until that decision is made, the warnings will continue, the sirens will sound, and the shelters will remain absent. The names will be added to the list. The families will grieve. The community will move on. The cycle will repeat. And somewhere in a mobile home park in the heart of the Midwest, a person will hear the warning and have nowhere to go.